Hey, Joseph with Landscape King. This is the Landscape King podcast. It's probably way too loud, but that is okay. Just a little introduction about us. We're Landscape King. I know we've talked about it in one of the other episodes, but we're a landscape company here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We started the company in 2017. I've been in the industry over 10 years, and we do landscape design, installation, and maintenance. As far as design, we're really just explaining things to people. We're not landscape architects, but we are going to come up with the rendering, come up with the plan of what the landscape is going to look like and help you with that. And so the whole point of doing this podcast is to educate and share with you what we've learned about landscaping. So we're going to talk about different concepts of landscaping, different things that we do, things that we've learned. So let's get to it. Today we're going to talk about what is a landscape, the components we deal with, and the problems that these installations solve. So according to ChatGPT, a landscape refers to the visible features of an area of land, including natural elements such as mountains, valleys, rivers, forests, and man-made elements such as buildings, roads, and gardens. It encompasses the overall appearance of character of specific pieces of land, often influenced by factors such as geography, climate, and human activity. But in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when we're talking about a landscape, a lot of times we're just talking about flower beds. So the components that we really deal with are going to be the flower beds. In other states, other places, they call them ornamental gardens or foundational plantings. But we're talking about flower beds. With flower beds, we're talking about irrigation, drainage systems, drainage considerations. We're going to talk about landscape lighting, sod, artificial turf, and just anything that we're planting around a commercial or residential home. And so really almost just anything outside is what we're going to refer to as the landscape. And landscaping is just the act of installing or maintaining these landscapes. And so let's break this down. So like we said, so we have flower beds. What is a flower bed? Often it's just a foundational planting right in front of a house. But what we like to do, we like to really pull things away from the house. And we'll talk more about that too, of some of the problems that these are going to solve for you. But there are problems that sometimes people will plant a landscape right up, or a flower bed right up on a house, and they'll put too many plants. They'll put plants way too close to the house, and then you just end up having tons of issues in the future. Especially in Baton Rouge, I see a lot of crepe myrtles that are like 6 inches away from the house, and then the client just for years and years is always having to prune that off the house. You've got, when the crepe myrtle blooms, you've got the flowers that fall all over the house, and you're just going to have issues with that. So that's why hiring a landscape professional who knows about plants, knows how big things are going to get, is super important. Or just finding out, doing your own research. So we have flower beds, then we have irrigation, kind of features that go with a flower bed. When you install new plants, especially in Baton Rouge, you've got to consider, how are you going to water it? Are you going to use irrigation? Are you going to get out there with a hose? Sometimes when people hand water, what they'll do is they'll get a sprinkler and they'll just turn that on, and then they'll go in and watch a football game or whatever they're doing. And then 5 hours later, they come out, and then when they call me and say, "Hey, Joseph, my plants are all dead. What did I do?" Well, you watered for 5 hours every week, and you get to a point where you can overwater. Sometimes people don't realize that you can overwater. So that's why having a plan for that's really important. So there's high pressure and micro-irrigation. There's probably other names for it, but that's what we call it here. The high pressure is going to tie into the main water line. And you do need a licensed irrigation contractor, and we use one to tie into that main water line. What we'll also do in Baton Rouge is the water company will come out and they can actually install another water meter for you. This saves you money because, now there is a charge for that, but this saves you money because when you install that second water meter, they're only going to charge you for the water. Whenever you're paying for your normal water and sewage, you're paying for the sewage as well. But if you have that second meter that's just for your irrigation, you're not going to have to pay for that sewage. So it's really important to just know that thing, or know how you're going to water it, what your plan is, yada, yada, yada. You know, you get the drift. You know what I'm saying. Next thing with a flower bed, another consideration is drainage. So if we're planting this right up on your house, We want to make sure that we consider where the water is going to go when it rains. Super important to know where the water is going to go when it rains. Do you have gutters? If you have gutters, and sometimes people think that installing gutters is the solution to fix the drainage in their yard. And I've seen this time and time again now where people install gutters and they still have drainage issues because once they install the gutter, it's going to catch the water, but there's going to still be that downspout that's going to discharge water. And if you're not rerouting that away from the house, you almost make it worse sometimes if you're not rerouting that downspout. What we like to do is tie into that downspout. There's different thoughts on the best way to do that. You either tie into it directly and just discharge that away from the house, or you put a catch basin, which is just a drain box with a grate on it, right underneath that downspout discharge. That goes, and the reason for that, especially if you have a lot of trees, you'd want to have an area. Basically, if you don't have that, the thought is that that leaves will get in there and clog that PVC or that pipe that's discharged. And that's why you would put that catch basin. That way you could take that grate off, take the leaves out, and the leaves will get caught at the bottom of that anyways. So that's super important to consider before installing a flower bed. And that's why it's a component of the landscape. And for a long time, we tried to just do flower beds because that's what we were really passionate about. But all of this, the irrigation, the drainage, the lighting, the sod, all of that is part of the landscape. It's part of, if you're trying to solve some of these problems that we're going to talk about, you've got to consider all of these things. So that's drainage. Also, we don't want to build the beds up too high. Depending on your slab, you have to consider where the weep holes are. And for pests or for termites and insects, they normally want like 4 to 6 inches of that slab exposed. A lot of times what we'll do too on the back of the flower bed is we'll install metal edging and we'll install weed fabric and then rock, either number 8 limestone or river rock or egg rock. We'll install that back there. And what that does is that'll catch water if you don't have gutters, and that'll also give you a buffer between the landscape or between the flower bed and the house. And that's what a lot of termite guys are going to tell you that they want you to do. It's super important because you don't want to have shrubs and things right up on the house. You definitely don't want a lot of mulch right on the house. And we use a lot of just hardwood bark mulch. Sometimes we use pine bark mulch as well, and you don't want that right on the house. And so that's what we're talking about, making sure you consider that when you're installing that landscape. And that's why that's part of the flower bed installation, making sure that that's separate from the house. So irrigation, we talked about high pressure irrigation. Micro-irrigation is what we use in almost every flower bed we do. And we give a 3-month warranty on the plants when we install the micro-irrigation. And all it is it, instead of tying to the main water line, we're going to tie to the water faucet, just the faucet that's closest to the area. And what we're going to do is just tie into that. We're going to put a hose splitter, and then we're going to put a just digital timer, just battery powered AA batteries. It's got a little digital display screen. You set it to come on as frequently as you need to. And this works great. Now you're going to have issues with this. There's a little bit of maintenance. It's not the fanciest, but it works and it waters the plants, which is what we need to do. Periodically, you are going to have to check those heads. Sometimes they get nicked whenever you're pruning, or sometimes they get clogged, and you do have to check those as well. And with a high pressure system, it's mostly you're going to use PVC and then swing pipe, and then you're going to have pop-up heads. In the lawn, you're going to have pop-up heads that are underneath or at ground level, and they just pop up. In the bed, you're just going to have spray heads. You will see those, and you know what it looks like. Everybody's seen them. You just might not know how it works, but it's just a way to water the plants. So we just need to make sure we do that. We need to make sure we consider drainage. And sometimes too, we've made mistakes where we've trapped water. We would need to make sure that we're not trapping water behind the bed. We need to have an access point for the water to escape, whether we're putting catch basins or we're doing a French drain. And all a French drain is just a gravel ditch, has pipe in it that has holes in it. Water seeps through it into the holes, and then escapes, and we're often going to discharge with solid PVC, either in a pond or a ditch or into a sewer line somewhere else. Just getting the water away from the house is super important when you're installing a flower bed. So the next component is the lighting, which I love the lighting, and there's so many cool things about the lighting. And we're going to talk about these things too and the problems they solve. I'm just giving you some information about them, and then we're going to go into a little more detail about them. But there's 3 things that landscape lighting does. This is my sales pitch on it. 3 things: safety, security, and super cool aesthetic. We'll talk more about that, but I just love landscape lighting. If you're going to spend money on landscaping, let's light it up at night. And there's reasons for that. With the safety, if you have a change in elevation, especially on like a stairs entering into a home, you definitely want to have those little path lights. Security, we're going to uplight everything. It's going to be super bright. Not an airport bright, but bright enough to really just illuminate what you have. And we're really trying to accent what you have to give you the super cool aesthetic, which, again, I used to have landscape lighting in my house. I need to reinstall that, but I love the landscape lighting. It's a huge part of the landscape. The next thing is sod, which is just grass. I didn't realize how much I love grass, but a lot of people, and growing up, my parents were the same way. They just had green, but it wasn't really grass. It was a bunch of weeds, different types of grass. Now I really appreciate just a solid lawn of just either St. Augustine, centipede, zoysia, and that's it, and no weeds. And it sounds silly. Some people really they're just happy with just green, but I'll look at their lawn and there's no lawn. It's just weeds, and it just drives me crazy now. And at my house, I have St. Augustine in the front yard, and I have zoysia in the back. And on this podcast, we'll talk a little bit more about the types of grass you use, but I really like zoysia a lot. I like it that it's the Palisades zoysia is a little bit, it's more drought tolerant than the other grasses that are available. It's also going to grow a little bit slower than St. Augustine does as well. But this is all components of what is a landscape. And so the next is outdoor living. This is where you're going to spend time at. This is where you're going to have the grandkids over. This is where you're going to have the party. If you're a bachelor, this is where you're going to have a lot of fun. If you have a family, this is where you're going to have a lot of fun in a different way, right? With your family. At our house, we have the neighbors come over, and we have, we don't have like an outdoor kitchen, but we have a paver patio where we have a little fire pit, and then we have a swing set, and we just have nice landscaping everywhere. We have areas for the kids to play, and it's just nice to be able to have somewhere to do life outside. Now, we have really bad mosquitoes, and it's hot in South Louisiana, but we still love being outside. We love getting the kids outside. It's always good to get the kids outside instead of inside watching TV. And the landscape, the outdoor living gives you that option. Pools, we don't install pools, but that's part of just the outdoor living. That's part of the landscape of your yard or even a commercial area. The parking lot is really part of the landscape as well. So each one of these solves a different problem. So let's talk about flower beds again. So what is the problem that a flower bed is going to solve? It depends on where you're at in life, what your objective is with that installation. But one problem it solves is if you're about to sell your house, giving you the curb appeal you need to pique the interest of a potential buyer. Sometimes people don't spend enough time, energy, and money on this. And if they did, it would help. It might not increase the value of the house by a whole lot, but what it definitely does is it's surely going to add more interest with curb appeal. Now we can do that by planting just fresh plants, just pruning what you already have, putting down fresh mulch, and just making that really clean. The other problem it solves too, and I want to give some examples. So we've got a client in Port Allen. Her and her husband are retired. They spend a lot of time at home. Their kids are gone. And we came in, we completely redid their landscape. And one day she just called me in tears, just thanking me so much, because every morning they go outside and they sit in the backyard. They look at the butterflies, the hummingbirds, and just the wildlife that's now there because of the landscaping we had installed for them. And that solved the problem for them of not having, however you want to call it, they didn't have that space to enjoy. And that's the most satisfying part, is when people it just changes their lives. And that's why our mission is to transform lives by transforming landscapes. And we really do this. And it sounds cheesy and silly, but it's real. Having an awesome landscape really can transform your life wherever you're at, whatever stage you're at in life as well. So now let's talk about drainage. Drainage is obvious. There's going to be a problem that you're solving. A lot of people in South Louisiana, we have these houses that are way too close to each other. And then we have these areas, there's nowhere for the water to go. And so what we have to do is we need to install catch basins or French drains and discharge the water away from the house. But the problem is sometimes we don't have enough slope to go from the backyard to the front yard and tie into the ditch or whatever is there. So we need to use a sump pump. And for a long time, we didn't do this, but now we do have a sub that we're able to make sure we do this the right way. And we do install these for people too, to be able to fix your problems. But yeah, drainage is obvious. If your whole yard is holding water, if you have pets, it's just going to be a pain in the butt every time it rains. If you have kids, same thing. Or if you just want to go and enjoy the yard, you can't because it just stays wet. And it's a huge problem in South Louisiana because we get a lot of rain down here. So what we do, like I said, we install either catch basins, French drains, whatever is appropriate. We install it to make sure we get that water away from the house. Sometimes we can just fix drainage by just regrading. And we just come in, take the existing weeds or grass out, bring in some river silt, regrade, make sure that the slope is away from the house, and then put down new grass. But oftentimes we've got to regrade, install catch basins, reroute the downspouts from the gutters, maybe do a French drain as well, and then discharge that away from the house. And sometimes we would discharge that into a sump pump basin. And then from there, the sump pump, every time it hit a certain level, there's a float on it. And then once it hits a certain level, that pump kicks on, pushes the water away from, or wherever it's discharging to. Now with that as well, it kind of brings us into the next thing is if you have poor drainage, once you fix that, if you don't have anywhere to hang out, like if you don't have a paver patio or a concrete patio or anywhere where you can actually sit in your backyard and have maybe a fire pit, or maybe you just have tables and chairs, then you need an outdoor living space. Now we do install paver patios. We don't do major concrete work, but sometimes a concrete patio is the best thing for you. And sometimes that's more cost effective for you. Sometimes maybe installing a whole outdoor kitchen. And we don't do that, but a lot of times that's part of the landscape as well. And that's going to give you an area to do life outside. And I can say firsthand, so my wife and I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And like I said before, we have a lot of friends on the street and they have kids that are similar ages. And it's just awesome to be able to have people over, have the kids run around. And that's what we want to give people, is that place to do life outside. So the next thing is sod. What sod is going to do, especially if you have what sod is going to do is it's going to give you, especially if you have pets, it's going to give you an area and sometimes that goes with drainage as well. Like I said, you're going to have to regrade, install the drainage system, and then resod. But sometimes, and we have an example of this right now, where we have this project where this lady lives in this neighborhood. All the houses are right on top of each other, 0 lot lines. She's a very small backyard. Every time it rained, it was just a sloppy mess. She didn't want to take her dogs in the back. When the grandkids were over, she didn't want them to go outside when it rained because it was always muddy. And she had a small little concrete patio, but she didn't have an area to put a table. That's why we came in. And for her, what we did was a paver patio and artificial turf. And my point to that too is in her yard, she did not have enough sunlight in this area to really grow grass. And I used to be opposed to this, but whether you want to call it synthetic or artificial turf, we are installing this now. And I think there's enough products out there that they're not real, obviously, but it still gives you an area, if you can't grow grass already, that's green, that's not dirt, and it's safe for the kids to play on, and it's our grandkids, and it's safe for pets. And they even have extra backing and holes in it to make sure that the urine filters through that quickly to where it's not staying on the turf and being a mess. Now, what that's going to do is going to give you an area, it's going to give you green grass in an area that you otherwise wouldn't be able to grow grass. And what it's also going to do is reduce your maintenance way down. Now, you're going to have to clean every time the pets go out there, but other than that, you're not going to have to mow it, and it's just always going to look green. Whereas it's a lot of maintenance to keep up, especially in a small area where there's a lot of weed eating, or maybe you can't get a mower back there, and it's just a lot of work and a lot of maintenance, and you're either going to pay somebody or you're going to do it yourself, and that's going to take you away from your family. So the next thing is the irrigation. Obvious problem that this solves is it's going to water the plants, the grass, whatever you have. But this just makes life easier too, because it keeps you from having to go out there with a hose, and it keeps you, what we do as well is we give a 3-month warranty on anything we install if we do the irrigation. So you get the warranty and you have the assurance that knowing that those things are going to get watered. And we talked about the high pressure for the lawn and the micro for the beds. Almost every flower bed we do the micro install or the micro irrigation for the beds. And like I talked about, that just hooks up to the faucet, digital timer, 1/2-inch tubing throughout the beds, the little plastic stakes. Some people say this stuff is just cheap and don't use it. But for some people, you need a way to water, and that's why we recommend that as well. So overall, a landscape for me is a place to do life outside. And I love being able to give that to our clients. And whether it's just a flower bed, whether it's the sod, the turf, the paver patio, irrigation drain, whatever it is, it's a component that allows you to just enjoy the space that you have outside. Now, sometimes people want vegetable gardens as well. We don't necessarily do that, but that's another component of the landscape too. And it's a really cool idea to be able to not only have nice stuff to look at, but stuff that you can eat. So we do plant a lot of citrus trees for people as well. But we just love landscaping. So that's why we're doing this podcast, to continue to educate people about the landscape, tips, tricks, and things like that. The next episode we are going to have a frequently asked questions episode where we just kind of go through a lot of the questions we get all the time. One of the questions I get a lot, and it's more of a comment than it is a question, is maintenance. We show up, they show me what they want, we talk about everything, and a lot of times it's the person who wants this beauty. They say that I want to walk outside, I want to be amazed, I want tons of color, I want lots of flowers, I just want a beautiful space. But then the next sentence is, I don't want to have to do anything for it, I don't want any maintenance. And that just doesn't exist. You're always going to have maintenance no matter what for your landscape. Now, of course, we offer maintenance, and we have 3 maintenance packages. It's the King, the Prince, and the Royal. And for every one of these, we do have lawn service that you can add on to it. But the main objective of these is to just maintain the landscape, really maintain the flower beds is what we're going to do there. And then if we do need to add on the lawn service, we do that for you too. But the point is, there is no such thing as no maintenance. There's always going to be maintenance to a landscape. And let's talk about that. So what's the maintenance for a flower bed? The maintenance for a flower bed is, one, especially in South Louisiana, is weeds. Now, we use a pre-emergent in every landscape install we do. We mix this into the soil, and then we put it on top of the mulch as well and just water that in. We use the active ingredient is prodiamine, and we use that. And you can get it. You can also get this at like Lowe's and Home Depot. There's something called Pruning. You could go to Clegg's. They shout out to Clegg's Nursery. They sell Dimension. They also sell Snapshot there too. You could also go to Ewing. We go to Ewing a lot and get stuff, and they have a generic Snapshot as well. That's what we use. I think the active ingredient, I get it mixed up, but we always use a pre-emergent for every bed we do, and it's just a granular preventative, or a granular weed preventative. And I've had it explained to me that it kind of creates a shield to where the weed seeds are not able to germinate through this. And it's super important that you do this. If you don't do this and you install a new landscape, there could be birds, wind, whatever could bring seeds, and then you spend all this money on this landscape, and then immediately the weeds come up. So talking about the maintenance, weeds, especially in South Louisiana, especially with all the rain we get, you're always going to have to think about the weeds. So in our Royal package, it's our basic package, we're just keeping the weeds out. It's basically a weeding service. We edge the perimeter of the beds, we blow off, we put out pre-emergent twice a year, and then we keep the weeds out. The next thing is pruning. So you are always going to have things grow. A lot of times when people say no maintenance or low maintenance, what they really want too is dwarf plants or miniature plants. So we're going to plant things that are going to stay smaller. We're going to space things out more and make sure that the maintenance isn't as much. And really what they're talking about there is they don't want to have to prune. And a lot of times what people are talking about too is they don't want to plant flowers seasonally. Even though we can do that for them, they still feel like it's too much work to have to plant flowers seasonally. So that's part of maintenance as well. If you want tons of color, you're not going to be able to achieve tons of color unless you plant annuals and perennials. And an annual is a flowering plant. It's really just a plant that lives for one season. So in South Louisiana, we have mostly just a warm season and cool season. There are some kind of in-between seasonal plants as well, but most of the time it's just going to be warm season and cool season annuals. Right now we're getting into the warm season. It's spring and we're super excited. And so things you could plant warm season wise are going to be like your vinca. There's going to be dianthus, angelonia. We plant blue days as well, and sometimes we use that as an annual. So you have annuals and perennials. Perennials live for a season, they die for a season, and then they come back. Sometimes blue days is going to be a perennial as well. Another perennial we use a lot is lantana. Plumbago oftentimes will perennialize. Sometimes it's an annual as well, but this is all part of the maintenance of a landscape, because if you want color all the time, you're going to have either annuals or perennials. And if you have a lot of perennials, then after the season they die or go dormant, you're going to want to cut that back and then let that new growth come back as well. So that's part of the maintenance cleanup. In our Prince package, we're going to do that for you. We're going to prune every 4 to 6 weeks if necessary. Early spring, we're going to do spring cutback, get everything ready. Especially roses. If you have roses, you really want to prune them in early spring, January, February. If you have knockout roses or drift roses, you can prune them any time of the year. But pruning is a huge part of maintenance. So the next part of maintenance, so we've got weeding, pruning, mulching. If you're going to install a flower bed, more than likely you're going to want fresh mulch. And sometimes people think it looks synthetic or fake, but it really does look awesome. I love the brown mulch. We use that a lot. We also use pine straw here in South Louisiana. I know in northern states, they think it's crazy that we use pine straw, but we do. We use pine straw a lot. There's also color enhanced pine straw. So just dyed pine straw that's really nice. And what the pine straw or what the mulch does is it's kind of three main purposes of the mulch of the pine straw. One is obviously the aesthetic. It just, that fresh color just really makes the landscape pop. 2, it's going to help deter weeds. And then 3, it helps the plants retain moisture. So it's not only the look, there's more purposes to it, and it makes a big difference. We like to use it. We don't just we use it in every new flower bed we install. We're either going to use the mulch or we're going to use the pine straw. Sometimes when people say they want no maintenance or low maintenance, sometimes they think installing rock achieves that. And we've done it, and it looks okay depending on what you choose. Like Mexican beach pebble, there's a multicolored Mexican beach pebble, and then there's just a gray Mexican beach pebble. It's just a smooth rock. It looks really nice. I like it. I actually like it a whole lot. And in certain scenarios, like certain styles of the home and the landscape, it looks good as the mulch. But the point is, sometimes people will use rock instead of mulch because you don't have to change the rock out seasonally like you would with the mulch. Sometimes people want to just install rock instead of the mulch. And we're going to want to make sure we install the mulch at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. But what we do with our packages, the Royal, our basic weeding service, the Prince, where we're going to do the weeding, we're going to do the pruning, keep it looking great. And both of those, we're coming 26 times a year. But if you're ready for it, the King, the Landscape King package, we're going to come 30 times a year. And what we're doing in that too is we're putting mulch down as well, whether it's mulch or pine straw. And we're going to put that down twice a year. And we're going to calculate that. And you just pay that fixed cost every month. That's why if you are someone who doesn't want maintenance, we can plan to not have as much maintenance, but you really just need to hire us to do the maintenance. And that's why we started doing maintenance, because we would do these awesome landscapes. They look beautiful for a few months, and then they just get overtaken with weeds. In a few years, the plants would just get overgrown. And that's why maintenance is such a huge part of landscaping, of the landscape. And it's kind of one of those factors you don't even think about when you're looking at the landscape, all the work that goes into keeping it clean. Now, there are people too that want more of a natural look, and they feel like if things are not, there are people who don't like things to look very groomed, pruned, and clean. But a lot of our clients do want the groomed, pruned, and clean look. But you can plant things and just kind of let them go wild. But there's still going to be things that are going to be weeds. And a weed is just an undesirable plant. And there's going to be things that would take over in your landscape, even if you had a more natural or airy look where you're not pruning as much. But those are all options, and those are things to consider when you're installing your flower bed of how much maintenance are you going to, and we talked about that in the last episode of who's going to maintain it. You got to make sure you have a plan for the maintenance. Whether you're going to do it, your kids are going to do it, your grandkids are going to do it, or we're going to do it. And that's why we have the king, the prince, and the royal. And the king, and all of these, you can add lawn care as well, but lawn care is not included in these because a lot of our clients we found either like cutting their grass themselves or their kids or grandkids, or they already have a lawn guy and that's all he does. And it's surprising, even like really high-end accounts, sometimes we have somebody who they already have a lawn care guy and they like him and he's been doing it 10, 15 years, but he doesn't do flower beds and he doesn't do maintenance for the flower beds. And that's why we come in with the king, the prince, and the royal. Whichever one you need, that's what we're here for. And we're going to continue doing this podcast too. We're going to continue making content. We're not going anywhere. Joseph with Landscape King. Let's plant some plants. Let's do whatever you need us to do. But if you got questions, we can even do a podcast episode where we just answer your questions. So if you want a question answered, just send us an email at joseph@landscapekingla.com. Or just respond or send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, and we can answer those questions in this podcast. Just to kind of recap, we went over what is a landscape. We went over the components that we install, the flower beds, the lawn, the turf, the outdoor living, the pavers, the drainage, the irrigation, all of it. All of it is so important, and it's important to plan accordingly and make sure that you have, especially with maintenance, that you have a plan for the maintenance as well. We'll continue to make these episodes. We're going to talk more about more of the frequently asked questions in the next episode. But if you got any questions, just ask us. And our promise, and this is kind of new, but our promise is that we don't stop till you love it. And we've had clients too where we're installing a new flower bed and they wanted something tweaked. And so we just don't stop till you love it. So Joseph with Landscape King, let's plant some plants.